Marcus Hale built his empire on silence, Patrick Doyle ruled through fear, and Elliot Crane survived by never being seen. Together, they controlled Liverpool's shadows for years, moving money and power through the docks without leaving fingerprints. In their final days, the alliances that protected them began to rot from the inside. What followed was not a war, but a quiet collapse that none of them could escape. Liverpool looked calm on the surface, but the calm was misleading. The city had learned how to hide its tension. Busy streets, crowded buses, and glowing shop windows created the illusion of normal life. Beneath that routine, something dark was slowly reaching its end. For more than 2 decades, a small group of powerful men had ruled the criminal world from the shadows. They never stood on street corners or shouted orders. Their control was quiet, careful, and absolute. These crime lords built their empires around the docks. Shipping containers arrived daily, carrying goods from across the world. Most held legal cargo, but some carried secrets that never appeared on official records. Drugs, weapons, and stolen goods moved through the port without raising alarms. Money flowed just as smoothly, washed clean through pubs, construction firms, and charity fronts. To the public, these businesses looked ordinary. To the underworld, they were lifelines. Police knew the names of the men behind it all, but knowing was never enough. Every investigation seemed promising at first, then suddenly collapsed. Surveillance tapes failed. Financial trails ended without explanation. Witnesses changed their stories or vanished completely. The crime lords became legends, spoken about in quiet tones, known as men who could not be touched. Over time, fear replaced hope, and many accepted that nothing would ever change. What no one saw was the slow decay inside the empire. Years of success had made the crime lords careless. Trust, once carefully earned, was now assumed. Money became more important than control. Each man began to focus on protecting his own fortune rather than the structure that kept them safe. The network that once worked like a machine started to grind and slip. In the final months, signs of trouble appeared, but they were easy to miss. A major shipment never reached its destination. A warehouse account showed missing funds. A trusted middleman disappeared without warning. Each problem was handled quietly, but together they formed a pattern. Someone was making moves in the dark, and no one knew who. The streets felt different. Longtime criminals sensed unease and pulled back from deals. Smaller gangs hesitated to follow old orders. Rumors spread that the balance of power was shifting. The crime lords responded by tightening control, but the effect was the opposite. Pressure created cracks, and cracks let secrets escape. At the same time, police activity increased in subtle ways. There were no dramatic raids or public announcements. Instead, there were silent watches, long hours of financial analysis, and careful tracking of movements near the docks. Investigators noticed unusual behavior among known associates. People who once acted with confidence now avoided attention. Some left the city entirely, abandoning homes and businesses overnight. The most dangerous change was happening inside the inner circle. Loyalty had always been enforced through fear and reward, but now fear outweighed reward. People began to protect themselves first. Information was no longer safe. Every message carried risk. Every meeting raised suspicion. The crime lords, once united by shared power, now watched each other closely. Liverpool continued its daily rhythm, unaware of how close it was to a turning point. Commuters walked past buildings used to hide millions in cash. Families lived above properties that stored evidence of years of crime. The city itself became an unknowing witness, waiting for something to break. By the time anyone realized the end was near, it was already too late. The final days had begun quietly, without alarms or sirens. The empire that ruled the shadows was standing on fragile ground, and the fall was coming faster than anyone expected. The first collapse came suddenly, without warning, and it sent a shock through the entire underworld. One of the most feared crime lords in Liverpool was found dead inside a warehouse close to the docks. The building had burned heavily, and thick black smoke had stained the walls and ceiling. At first glance, it appeared to be a tragic accident, the kind that could happen in an area filled with old wiring and illegal activity. For a brief moment, many believed the story would end there. Fire investigators quickly noticed details that did not fit. The blaze had started in a controlled way, not as a random spark. Certain areas were completely destroyed, while others were barely touched. It looked planned, not chaotic. The body was discovered in a position that suggested the man never tried to escape. That alone raised serious questions. This was not someone who panicked easily. He had survived threats, arrests, and rival attacks for years. As police searched through the remains, they made a discovery that changed everything. Behind a false wall was a small room protected by thick insulation. The fire had damaged it, but not destroyed it. Inside were metal boxes filled with documents, flash drives, and handwritten notes. This was not casual storage. It was a carefully prepared archive. The contents were explosive. There were detailed records of drug shipments, shipping routes, and corrupt contacts. Dates, times, and coded symbols filled the pages. There were bank account numbers linked to shell companies and offshore locations. Investigators realized they were looking at the missing piece of dozens of failed cases. The man who was now dead had kept proof of his own crimes. The biggest shock came later. Analysts discovered that some of the files matched information already known to police but never fully confirmed. It suggested the crime lord had been slowly feeding information from the inside. He was not just protecting himself. He was building a safety net. The evidence pointed toward a plan to trade secrets for freedom. This revelation changed the meaning of his death. The fire was no longer seen as a cover-up or accident. It was an execution designed to stop a betrayal. Someone close to him must have learned about the hidden room. Someone knew the value of those records and acted before they could be used. News of the discovery spread quietly through criminal circles. Panic followed. Associates feared their names were written in the boxes. Old allies cut contact and destroyed phones. Some fled the country within days. The sense of control that once defined the empire vanished almost overnight. Police worked around the clock, knowing the evidence could collapse the entire network if handled carefully. Each document revealed another connection, another hidden asset, another crime long believed unsolved. The death of one man had opened a door that could not be closed. What made the situation more dangerous was the message his death sent. If a crime lord could be eliminated so cleanly, no one was safe. The remaining leaders knew they were being watched, not just by police, but by their own people. Trust dissolved into suspicion. The warehouse became a symbol of the end. A place once used to hide illegal goods had exposed the truth instead. The fire meant to erase evidence had failed, leaving behind the very proof needed to bring the system down. By the time the smoke cleared, the damage was already done. The first fall had triggered a chain reaction. The power structure that ruled Liverpool's underworld for years had lost its foundation. The final days were no longer a distant threat. They were unfolding in real time, and there was no turning back. After the first death, the balance of power collapsed fast. The second crime lord understood the danger better than anyone. He had survived by anticipating threats, and now every instinct told him the walls were closing in. He vanished from public view within hours of the warehouse discovery. Properties connected to his name were emptied. Phones went silent. Vehicles were abandoned in quiet streets. To the outside world, it seemed as if he had disappeared completely. In reality, he was still moving, but never staying long enough to be found. He shifted between hidden flats, back rooms of businesses, and short-term rentals paid for in cash. Each move was planned to avoid patterns, yet the more he tried to protect himself, the more unstable his world became. Without regular contact, his organization began to fracture. Money problems surfaced almost immediately. Payments to distributors were delayed. Couriers complained about missing cash. Accounts that once balanced perfectly now showed gaps that could not be explained. These were not small losses. Large sums had vanished, and no one could trace where they had gone. Suspicion turned inward. The crime lord responded by tightening control. He reduced the number of people he trusted and cut off long-standing partners. Instead of restoring order, the decisions caused fear. People who had once felt secure now believed they were being set up as scapegoats. Loyalty weakened under pressure. What he did not realize was that betrayal had already taken root. One of his closest enforcers had been quietly collecting information for months. The man understood that the empire was dying and wanted a way out. He passed details to rivals to secure protection and shared key evidence with authorities to reduce his own risk. Every move was calculated. This hidden betrayal began to shape events. Police raids increased, always narrowly missing the crime lord himself. Safe houses were discovered soon after he left them. Storage units were searched days after being cleared. It felt impossible to stay ahead. Someone always seemed to know the next move. As fear grew, the crime lord made a fatal mistake. He began to isolate himself completely. The crime lord responded by tightening control. He reduced the number of people he trusted and cut off long-standing partners. Instead of restoring order, the decisions caused fear. People who had once felt secure now believed they were being set up as scapegoats. Loyalty weakened under pressure. What he did not realize was that betrayal had already taken root. One of his closest enforcers had been quietly collecting information for months. The man understood that the empire was dying and wanted a way out. He passed details to rivals to secure protection and shared key evidence with authorities to reduce his own risk. Every move was calculated. This hidden betrayal began to shape events. Police raids increased, always narrowly missing the crime lord himself. Safe houses were discovered soon after he left them. Storage units were searched days after being cleared. It felt impossible to stay ahead. Someone always seemed to know the next move. As fear grew, the crime lord made a fatal mistake. He began to isolate himself completely. He stopped attending meetings and relied on written instructions passed through intermediaries. This slowed decision-making and created confusion. Orders were misinterpreted. Shipments went to the wrong locations. Profits dropped further. Meanwhile, investigators pieced together the network using evidence from the warehouse fire. Financial records linked directly to the second crime lord emerged. The paper trail showed payments connected to violent crimes across the city. The more they uncovered, the clearer his role became. The final twist came unexpectedly. Acting on precise intelligence, police surrounded a small flat far from the docks, in a quiet residential area. Inside, they found the crime lord alone. There were no guards, no escape routes, and no hidden exits. The man who once controlled entire neighborhoods was hiding in a place no one would ever think to look. The arrest ended without resistance. There was no dramatic chase or confrontation. The silence was almost unsettling. His capture confirmed what many already suspected. He had been betrayed from within. Later analysis proved it beyond doubt. Messages recovered from seized devices showed coordination between his enforcer, rival gangs, and law enforcement. The empire had not been destroyed by force. It had been sold piece by piece. With his arrest, a second pillar of Liverpool's criminal world fell. Fear turned into certainty. The final crime lord was now completely exposed. The end was no longer approaching. It was already in motion, and the shadows were growing smaller by the day. With two crime lords gone, attention turned to the last man still standing. He had always been different from the others. While they relied on fear and reputation, he relied on distance and silence. His name rarely appeared in rumors, and his face was unknown to most of the underworld. For years, this invisibility had kept him safe. Now, it made him the most dangerous figure left. Police believed he was the architect behind much of the operation. The evidence recovered from the warehouse and later raids pointed toward a single coordinating force. Money flowed through companies that never appeared linked on the surface. Charities, property firms, and shipping consultancies formed a web too clean to be accidental. At the center of it all was someone who never left fingerprints. As pressure increased, the final crime lord made his move. All activity tied to him stopped at once. Accounts were emptied, businesses closed without explanation, and trusted associates vanished. Within days, it appeared he had fled the country. Investigators searched airports, ports, and border records but found nothing. No confirmed sightings, no travel history. It was as if he had erased himself. The disappearance caused confusion and frustration. Some believed he had planned this escape for years, waiting for the perfect moment. Others suspected he had help from corrupt insiders. With no clear trail, the case stalled briefly, but small details began to surface. A routine review of identity records revealed something strange. A man living quietly in a suburban neighborhood matched fragments of financial data linked to the crime network. He had no criminal history, no obvious income, and no social presence. His lifestyle was modest, but his movements were precise. He paid bills on time, avoided attention, and never interacted with neighbors beyond polite distance. Investigators slowly rebuilt the trail. Property records showed the house had been purchased through layered companies years earlier. Utility payments were routed through foreign accounts that had recently been emptied. Everything pointed to careful planning. The crime lord had not run, he had hidden in plain sight. Before authorities could move, events took a sudden turn. Emergency services were called to the suburban home after concerns were raised about the occupant. Inside, they found the final crime lord dead. There were no signs of forced entry, no visible injuries, and no struggle. The scene was calm, almost staged. The timing raised immediate questions. Days earlier, all remaining funds connected to him had vanished from known accounts. Millions were gone without a trace. No transfers were recorded through standard systems. The money had simply disappeared. Whatever plan he had created, it had reached its conclusion. Forensic analysis could not confirm outside involvement. There was no clear evidence of murder, but no convincing explanation for a natural death either. The uncertainty added another layer to the mystery. Some believed he chose his own ending to avoid capture. Others believed someone else ensured his silence once the money was secured. The discovery sent shockwaves through the criminal world. Without leadership or resources, the remaining network collapsed instantly. Routes shut down, deals were abandoned. People who once acted with confidence rushed to erase connections and disappear. The final crime lord had succeeded in one last way. He denied the authorities a trial, denied rivals revenge, and denied the city full closure. His death closed the chapter on an era, but it left unanswered questions behind. As police sealed the house and reviewed the evidence, one truth became clear. The most powerful figure in Liverpool's underworld had survived for so long by being unseen. In the end, he disappeared the same way he lived, quietly, leaving behind nothing but shadows and a fortune no one would ever find. When the last crime lord was found dead, the city did not erupt in celebration. Instead, Liverpool exhaled slowly, as if it was unsure whether the danger was truly over. Years of control had trained people to expect another figure to rise. But this time, nothing followed. No new leaders appeared. No organized response came from the underworld. The silence itself was the strongest sign that the era had ended. In the weeks that followed, police activity shifted from pursuit to cleanup. Investigators traced remaining accounts, seized abandoned properties, and dismantled shell companies that no longer had anyone defending them. What they found confirmed what many suspected. The network had been held together by fear and money alone. Once both were gone, there was nothing left to support it. Smaller gangs attempted to claim pieces of territory, but without the old supply lines, they failed quickly. Routes through the docks collapsed. International contacts cut ties. Shipments that once moved freely stopped arriving. Violence flared briefly, then faded. Without leadership, chaos could not organize itself. Communities that had lived under the shadow of organized crime began to feel the change. Certain businesses reopened under new ownership. Properties that had been used for laundering were sold or seized. The sense of constant pressure eased. People still remembered what had happened, but the fear no longer controlled daily life. The missing money remained the greatest mystery. Financial experts searched for months, tracing offshore trails and false identities. Every lead ended the same way, with carefully planned dead ends. Whoever moved the fortune had done so outside normal systems. The wealth that once fueled the empire had vanished, leaving nothing behind to fight over. The lack of answers caused endless speculation. Some believed the money was destroyed to erase all traces. Others believed it was hidden, waiting to be claimed. No evidence supported either theory. Over time, the mystery became part of local legend, a final reminder of how completely the crime lords had operated beyond reach. For law enforcement, the case became a rare example of a criminal empire collapsing from within. It was not a single arrest or raid that ended it. It was betrayal, fear, and the slow exposure of secrets. Each crime lord fell in a different way, but all were undone by the same weakness. They trusted no one, and eventually that included each other. The city itself carried the memory quietly. Old warehouses were renovated. Streets once associated with crime returned to normal routines. New generations passed through without knowing the full story. Only fragments remained, scattered through sealed files and unfinished investigations. Yet the impact of the final days lingered. The collapse reshaped how authorities approached organized crime. Patience replaced force. Financial trails became as important as arrests. The lessons learned would influence cases for years to come. Liverpool did not become free of crime, but it became free of kings. Power no longer sat in the hands of a few unseen figures. The shadows they once ruled grew smaller, thinner, and easier to watch. In the end, the most shocking truth was not how the crime lords lived, but how they fell. Not with public trials or dramatic endings, but with quiet disappearances, sealed rooms, and unanswered questions. Their final days passed almost unnoticed by the world they once controlled. And as the city moved forward, one thing was certain. An era had closed for good, leaving behind only echoes, warnings, and a reminder that even the most powerful empires can collapse without a single